Good afternoon, everyone. This is Derek Phillips filling in for Ryan Brown. Ryan had another engagement that came up, so I'm filling in for hosting duties and on his behalf. Thank you all for joining us for this kickoff this afternoon. I'm going to give it another minute to let some more folks file in, and then we'll get started.
Quick question before we get started. I had sent the slides to Ryan, and in case we weren't able to share, do you guys need them, or should I send them somewhere else, or are we going to be able to share our screens?
Trudy, I will shoot you my email real quick, and
Perfect.
if you can send them over to me.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
Yep.
Trudy, do I turn it over to you after I give a brief welcome?
Sorry, it should be Bob, but I don't see Bob yet. A little nerve-wracking. But yeah, I think you can hand it over to Bob after the welcome
Okay.
introduction, and then he'll take it, and then I'll jump in at the end of Bob. So
Great.
Rudy, do you want us on
All
video
right.
or
Well,
off?
we've got 3 after 2 o'clock, and I know everybody's time is precious, so we'll go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Derek Phillips. I work in the Office of Communications with Ryan. He was unable to join today, but I'm hosting on his behalf. Um, we're very excited at the South Carolina Department of Education to be a part of this statewide teacher-driven research initiative with the Marzano Research and Education Analytics. And I will at this time turn it over to Dr. David Mathis to give a brief overview.
Thank you, Derek, and all those who are able to participate with us today. And I just really simply want to offer a brief welcome to everybody that's with us today. This is an incredible opportunity for educators in South Carolina. I know we call a lot of things game changers, but I believe this has the potential to be a game changer in our state. We get to sit at the feet of the experts. How good is it that we're with Bob Marzano and his team and the folks at Ed Analytics? I don't know that many in their career ever have that opportunity. And so it's humbling to know that in our career we're this up close and personal with greatness is in the education community. As we look at what we're about to do with this project, we often look for what works, and in the past we've jumped on so many bandwagons, with what we think works, and we jump on it, and to find that we really don't get any results. I think what we're going to find in this project is we will know what works best for students in South Carolina. And it's more than just what works, it's what works best. And it's going to be South Carolina homegrown. So we'll have our own clearinghouse of strategies and interventions that are proven effective. And I guess it's okay along the way if we find some things that we've been doing or practices that we have that aren't as effective as we once thought, but perhaps that will give us the opportunity to make the changes that we need to make. So I've termed this as hashtag game changer, because I know that this is what this opportunity is going to present for us. I can't go any further without giving a word of appreciation to Dan Relier at the department here in South Carolina. This was his brain trust. He thought of the idea and then he followed through and figured out a way to make this happen. And an incredible opportunity again for those in South Carolina. We're starting with a small cohort of folks, especially focusing on middle school math. And we know right now the need that we have coming as we move through the pandemic, the need that we have for strong math interventions and strategies. So those who aren't in this cohort, we hope that you know that you'll have the opportunity in the future. We hope this will be an opportunity for you to see what lies ahead. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob Marzano and his team to walk us through what we're about to embark on. And I got a text earlier from Dan Relier, and he said, "Are you excited?" And I said, "I'm beyond excited for the opportunity that we have here." So thank everyone for attending and your interest in this. And I'm going to turn it over to Bob and his team.
Bob, I'm going to share the slides. I just got access to sharing, so I'll go ahead and share. And if you want to get us kicked off, can you see it now?
No. Okay, now I can I be heard?
Can anyone else see the screen? Can
Okay.
everyone else see the?
Yes, I can see it and I can hear Bob.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah, that was so that there was a little bit of excitement there for the last 10 minutes because I don't have WebEx, and I was trying to figure out how to get on. And I'm 75. I don't know how to work WebEx. So yeah. I have a tough time remembering how to tie my tie. So anyway, I've probably lost credibility right there. Well, thank you so much for letting me be part of this. And I'm just going to give the introduction here to the project, and Dr. Trudy Charasaro is going to actually put the specifics to it. I'll give you a little bit of my background. I started teaching in 1968. First 10 years of my career were working directly with students, but 1968 was a long time ago. So I'm in my 53rd year of K-12 education. So after that first decade, all the rest of the next 42, 43 years were spent on the R&D side, trying to translate research and theory into practice. And, that historical perspective, I think, is a good place to start. It really is, in terms of this endeavor that you're going into. I recommend a book. It's dated, but I recommend it highly. It was written by Morton Hunt in 1997. It was called When Science Takes Stock. And it's just an excellent, comprehensive but non-technical description of science, not just in the social sciences, but in the hard sciences too. And you can tell by the title, it's about how science uses studies to draw conclusions. And it's easy to think that, oh my gosh, science is out there and they do these studies and they will tell us exactly what to do. And it's not like that. It's really not. I mean, it's a gradual process. And what you're going to find in education is that I go back far enough that I remember when the first descriptive studies, large-scale descriptive studies, were popular in K-12 education, like in the 60s, where, I mean, really, we just didn't know that much about what actually went on in school. What we knew is how many students were in school and how many students graduated. And in those days, schools were judged by, no kidding, how many books they had in their library. That's not an exaggeration, among other things, obviously. It was really in the 1980s, late 70s and early 80s that the world started to change a bit in terms of K-12 education and the research. And that was the era of what's called the school effectiveness movement. And really at that time, there were many, many descriptive studies done, correlational studies, that were trying to identify, well, what are those factors that if schools do them well, there's a relationship with how students achieve. And that was a big breakthrough. And there were people like Ron Edmonds and Larry Lazat, who's still out there working. And those, like I say, that was a breakthrough time. It really was. Oh my gosh, there are certain factors that at the school level and classroom level that if you attend to, these have a relationship with student achievement. That lasted for a long time. Somewhere after the 80s, actually, I would say in the mid 90s, the research and education turned more to experimental. You see, descriptive studies are, well, what's the relationship between this variable and this variable? Experimental is more rigorous by definition. Well, let's look at a group that does something and a group that doesn't do something. And that just started an explosion of that type of research, with a gold standard being that you do studies where you have two groups, experimental control, and you randomly assigns people to those groups, and that still is the gold standard, and very sophisticated ways of analyzing results. Kind of along with that was a big movement to synthesize the literature. And in the beginning, those were descriptive too, but then meta-analysis was introduced. And I remember when it was introduced, it was actually a gentleman named Dr. Gene Glass. He was at the University of Colorado. It was he was the president of American Educational Research Association. And it was his presidential speech where he really said, hey, in education, what we should do is put all these studies together, in rigorous ways. And we have these generalizations then that we can apply to K-12 education. So that had a long tail to it, and it still does. I'm sure many of you are aware of John Hattie's research. He's the premier meta-analyst in the world, I believe. But there has been a reaction to that too over time, and that is, oh my gosh, these things mix descriptive research with these syntheses, mix descriptive research with experimental research. And so the research world about decade ago realized that it kind of had stalled. We had all these rigorous requirements for studies and looking for the highest level of generalizability as possible, and they weren't telling us much. There was very little we could say, make sure you do this. Now, about a decade ago, with that realization, researchers started saying, maybe there's another part to this. It's not like what has been done is inaccurate or wrong, but maybe there's another part to it. And that's the slide you see in front of you. I'll give you a second to take a look at that. Basic message here is that why don't we continue to do this large scale research and hopefully make it as rigorous as possible. But that's probably never going to answer the questions of what is the best type of instruction I as an individual teacher can use. It'll give us some direction. But in my classroom with my particular subject area, my personality, my subject area, that big large scale research is probably going to not be specific enough to tell me exactly what to do to get the best results. Now that's where the whole notion of teacher as researcher, started to bloom, and it is really beginning to take off. And for me, I think it's the step we've always been missing, and that is to always look at the large scale research, but parallel with that, have research done by classroom teachers. Now, if you know any of my work, I've spent most of my work in R&D looking at what happens in the classroom, and I'm firmly convinced that the generalizations about classroom instruction are a good thing to look at, but they play out very differently from classroom to classroom. I once wrote a book called Classroom Instruction That Works, and that was in 1999. And it was one of these syntheses studies. It was a meta-analysis of a few instructional strategies. And there were 9 of them. And I published that in a book called Classroom Instruction That Works. And I was very pleased that people were starting to use it until I started getting emails from teachers across the country saying, my principal read that sometimes stupid book you wrote or something to that effect, and now every time he or she comes into my classroom, they make sure I'm doing these specific strategies in specific ways. And I thought, oh my gosh, unintended consequence. That's not the idea, that we would know something at such a level that you do step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Over time, we're going to get to, more and more detail. But bottom line, teachers have to look at their own classrooms, and their own style and see what works best. Now you might say, well, great, we've been doing that for a long time, but no, we're trying to act as researchers here in the classroom. So that doesn't mean just guessing, I think I'm doing a good job, or I don't think I'm doing a good job. Well, let's actually implement strategies from experimental research into the classroom. Now, that's what's available now, and it never was before. And when I say now, at Marzano Research, under the direction of Dr. Trudy Chirisaro, you can hear in a little bit, through a government contract that we had, we've created tools that classroom teachers can use to ask questions about their own techniques, their own strategies, and get rigorous results. Now, they won't have as much generalizability as a large study, but we're not looking for that because other people are doing these large-scale, rigorous studies, experimental research. That should continue to go on. Okay, but now what we're trying to add is let's get the classroom teacher in on this too. And what's really exciting about it is that, like I say, when I say tools, Trudy will talk about and show you tools that are available. Anybody, it's free to anybody in the world. It's a simple calculator. You enter the data and it will tell you what the results are for your class. It'll even give you some statistical indications of whether, boy, that's the your results are things you should pay attention to, or or whether these results might be spurious, and try it again. So this is a paradigm shift that's available right now to classroom teachers. And as the slide indicates, well, we want to rethink generalizability, sampling procedures, and validity for classroom measures when we look at individual classroom teachers. Now, I have had this dream for a long time. I firmly believe, again, all due credit to what large-scale research has done and continues to do. We should always look at that. But if we had a parallel universe, if you will, where classroom teachers across the country were creating their own teacher-designed experiments, and those were being collected. Say, at one level, a classroom teacher can say, well, I've heard this technique called using graphic organizers. And I'm going to give that a try. I'm going to set up a little study where I use this with one class and not with another, and for the same period of time, and hopefully my classes are pretty much the same, or even maybe I have a chance to kind of organize my students into two groups that I do those randomly. That's even better. But I want to see if this works or not. The tools that are available will show me how to enter the data and will analyze the data for me. Now, what you're doing in South Carolina, my understanding of the project, is a step above that. What you're doing is saying, okay, let's invite teachers to do homegrown studies with guidance. And there's a lot of guidance in these tools that Dr. Chirisaro and others have created. Let's do these homegrown studies, but also let's put them together and create a database, that everybody in South Carolina can see. So that is my understanding of the project. And if I'm correct, that is one of the most exciting things I've ever seen. That's amazing. So I had a, kind of a dream that, there's always a large scale research. We should always look at that, always consult that. But the individual states create their own research base done by classroom teachers as rigorously as possible. And you can do that now. You don't have to take a course in statistics, and buy fancy programs to do it. It's all available to you. Just imagine if that happened, if South Carolina created this research base on specific strategies that are done by South Carolinians. I could also see that being done at the district level too. There'd be a statewide effort, but then parallel efforts at the district to create your own database for the strategies, that teachers are using. And the strategies that are studied will grow over time. Right now, you're being very wise. You're starting in mathematics, and it's a great place to start because there are very solid, large-scale research studies that have been done that you can borrow from. So I think this is a new era, of research in K-12 education in the United States. I've been doing this for years, on a small scale with teachers. And I tell you, I'm always not just impressed, but I'm always inspired by the dedication of classroom teachers saying, no, I really want to know. I want to know if this worked. I don't want to just feel good about it or just take my general perceptions. And they very much will get into, well, what does this mean? What does an effect size tell you? And what do these probability statements tell you? And that's really exciting. Like I said, very serious researchers out there, just waiting for an opportunity like this. So as I said, this is a paradigm shift. It really is. I will be happy to be part of it in any way, shape, or form, even if it's just as comedy relief when I can't get on WebExes. But I'd love to listen to what you do. Probably the most exciting thing, will be when you start aggregating your data, and seeing differences, and seeing getting down to the level where you can pinpoint what you have to do with a specific strategy to make it work with specific students. And I think the generalizability goes all the way down to a single teacher. I really do. That certain teachers, will get better results than other teachers for their particular class by doing certain things. And that's what expertise is all about. Getting more and more specific about the things that you do that produce the best results. So I'm going to turn it over to the lead of this project, Dr. Cherisaro.
And I just have to figure out how to unmute on WebEx as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, let me just switch screens here for a second. Whoops, got too much stuff open. I should stop share first. Okay, sorry guys, apologize for that. Switching screens, I can show a different PowerPoint here. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what does this actually look like when a teacher is a researcher in their own classroom and conducting a rigorous experiment. So we have kind of created this teacher as a researcher instructional improvement cycle. So we're really kind of mirrors, instructional improvement cycles that we know of from school improvement processes and other improvement cycles, where you're studying and testing and then reviewing and kind of repeat the cycle as you go. But in this case, we're focusing on specific instructional strategies, as Bob talked about. So the steps are really to kind of pick a very specific instructional strategy that you want to try out in your classroom. And then you make plans for implementing the strategy in a way that will allow you to conduct an experiment. And so that's going back to, as Bob explained, with these rigorous experiments, a way to look at what happens when students get the strategy as compared to what happens when they don't get the strategy. So we use that rigorous research design within classrooms as well. Then you collect data on when the strategy is being implemented. So you collect data to look at what does student achievement look like before you implemented the strategy, and what does it look like after you implement the strategy, comparing that to student achievement when the strategy wasn't being implemented. And that really allows you to understand, was there effectiveness in implementing the strategy. During the step of collecting data on the strategy implementation, also kind of understanding what's happening in your classroom outside of implementing the strategy in order to allow you to then analyze the data and reflect on what the results are, what was the effect of implementing that strategy, as well as what did the implementation look like, to really inform some next steps for your instruction. So it helps you learn about how that strategy works, maybe a little bit in general, but more specifically, how is it working in your classroom, in your context, and even down to like that point in time at which you were implementing the strategy. So as Bob mentioned, we created a toolkit which walks you through the process of going through that cycle of selecting the strategy, implementing it, collecting some data, and analyzing the results. That is available on the Marzano Research website if you wanted to dig into it and take a look at it after, don't do it now, but after the presentation. And so what we're trying to kind of accomplish through this are both kind of learning outcomes and also practice outcomes. So the learning outcomes are really focused on helping teachers to become better suited to be researchers. So this is where you're learning about the instructional improvement cycle, and then also learning, about some statistical concepts. So I know many people are familiar with effect sizes with Bob's work and with Hattie's work. So that's a pretty familiar term to teachers, but digging into understanding that a little bit more, what generalizability statistics might be, such as confidence intervals, and also understanding things like baseline equivalence. So these sound like terms that maybe teachers aren't as familiar with, but that helps them just to understand what does it mean to conduct an experiment. Also learning how to analyze the results. Now that doesn't mean that they have to compute effect sizes. We've created an Excel analysis tool that computes that for them, but the ability to kind of just put in their assessment data and have that computed for them. And then just really understanding, again, as they're trying out different strategies, how is this working? Is this, do I see that it has an impact? And also kind of understanding more about what does it mean to implement different strategies well in their classrooms. So then in addition to kind of learning about how to be a good researcher and how to conduct rigorous research in your classroom, some of the practice outcomes, or the maybe more important outcomes as well, is really just becoming a more reflective practitioner. So teachers who have been through this process really talk about, after going through it, just the process really allowing them to be very deliberate and intentional about thinking through, how am I teaching this? What are the strategies that I am using? And then also being able to have some rigorous concrete data on how well that worked. And then again, because it's in their own setting and in their own classroom and they're understanding the implementation, it helps them to also really know what's working, not in general for educators, but specifically what's working for you with your kids in your classroom. And then another aspect to it is, deepening a professional learning community. So because we do this with teams of teachers who are all going through the process together, a very scaffolded approach where there's time to workshop together the strategies that you're going to implement, the opportunity to reflect together on the results of your strategies. It helps to kind of build that community of learners as teachers. So we do this through a professional development series, and we have kind of six sessions that we include with kind of time in between to process, read materials, and plan. Getting to session 4 is really kind of planning for implementing the strategy. And then once we get through session 4, there's time to actually do your research so that you the teachers go and they implement the strategy. It's, you know, a short turnaround. So looking at like a 2 to 3 week type of strategy. They gather their results, come back together, reflect on their results. And then we like to try to do at least 2 cycles within the training. So oftentimes you learn a lot from doing the first study, not just about the strategy that you implemented, but about how to define strategies, what types of assessments you might want to use to collect information. So it gives you an opportunity to do a second round of implementation and then come back and reflect together as well. So the expectations for districts and teachers that are participating are really just to, as much as possible, be available to participate in all of the PD sessions. Again, there's some kind of homework in between where they're going to do some planning on their own in between the sessions. We're looking to really you know, do some prototyping, especially with this first cohort, to gather information, to kind of move some of the tools that we have into a more digital platform to allow for even cooler experiments in the classroom. So gathering a lot of input and feedback, the data, the worksheets that you're filling out, and potentially some surveys from the teachers who are involved in this process. And then again, we like to try to implement at least 2 teachers researcher cycles. So the ability to actually plan for and then implement 2 different experiment cycles in the classroom. And then again, just gathering lots of feedback during this time to help develop the digital platform for this as well. So just as a, I know it's a lot of words, but to kind of show you what does it look like when teachers are actually gathering the data and getting the analysis. So this is the current Excel analysis tool, a screenshot from that that just shows you how teachers would actually collect data. So they would have implemented, this is a case where a teacher would have implemented the strategy with one classroom and had another classroom that was a control group where they didn't get the strategy, and they would do an assessment prior to implementing the strategy in both classrooms, and then an assessment at the end to see how students did from beginning to end for students who got the strategy, and from beginning to end for students who didn't get the strategy. So you're just entering here in the column of the pre is the assessment beforehand for the group that got the strategy, the assessment beforehand for the group that didn't get the strategy, and then you enter in the same results afterwards for those students who got the strategy and for students who didn't get the strategy. So it's really simple, just keeping percent correct on a teacher developed assessment and entering in that data into the Excel spreadsheet. And then what that gives you is, again, these more kind of sophisticated statistics that we use in experiments with large-scale rigorous research as well. And it helps you to understand, what the students' achievement looked like prior to beginning the study. So did they start out in kind of the same place or a similar place, so that we're not really looking at students that are so different to begin with that we wouldn't be able to see whether or not the strategy had an effect. And then looking at kind of the confidence, and this is really thinking about generalizability, like would we be able to say that this is something that we could see in other classrooms if it were to be implemented. Oftentimes this has to do with the size of the sample. And then the final thing that's probably the most interesting piece is that effect size. So it computes an effect size for you to say, in my classroom with this group of students, when I did this, this is the effect that I got. So helping them think about, really what was the impact of doing this with my students, and then using that to really reflect on their practice. And again, we do have some resources on the Marzano Research website. So in addition to that toolkit that we mentioned earlier, there's a teacher as researcher white paper also that just kind of talks through the kind of the idea and philosophy behind this. So I'm going to stop share and see if Bob wanted to add any more to that after the. Oh, and you're muted, Bob.
Okay. Oh, thanks very
There
much.
you go.
Yeah, no, actually, just one thing I wanted to add is that the PD is to help you understand how to use the tools and get practice using the tools. They're there for you to use forever. I mean, you really don't even have to, excuse me, the PD will set you up for it, but I mean, it's not like you have to go through the PD to have access to the tools. And so what we're trying to set up is these activities that now give you, the tools and the experience to continue to do this. And as I said, for me, I just think this should be done at the state level. If it can't do it at the state level, at least the district level, where you're continually doing these it's not action research, it's experimental research. You're continually doing these teacher design, experimental, quasi-experimental studies, and keeping track of all that information. Like I say, it's now possible to do because of the tools that have been created. Before, you had that give the data to somebody who knew how to do this, or learn how to do it yourself. And classroom teachers are busy people. They probably don't have a whole lot of time to do that. So it's really, the beginning. Hopefully, it's the beginning of something that ultimately changes the profession, starting with South Carolina.
Great. And I think we're handing it back over to you, David, to maybe talk.
Okay, thank y'all very much. And Bob, a lot of us on here are sort of starstruck right now. Being able to sit at your feet with this is just an incredible opportunity. And I think, this is going to build capacity in our teachers and give them the confidence that the work they're doing is meaningful. And so I've sort of nicknamed this as our own, South Carolina's own version of What Works Clearinghouse, when we'll have our warehouse of things that work in South Carolina. And I would say to those districts that may not be in the first cohort, just be patient. We want to include you, and we'll give you the opportunity. This first cohort, we need to take small and make sure we get it right. And so we know with the great leadership that we have with the Marzano Group and Ed Analytics, we will get that. So don't worry, you will be able to be a part of this, and because this is just the beginning. We really want this to continue and grow and become a common practice in South Carolina. So again, thanks to Dan Relier for his leadership in this and his thoughtfulness of how to do this. Can't thank him enough. Because it's one thing to dream about it, but it's another thing to really actually make it happen. And that's what's been done here. So so Trudy and Bob and group, I think that's it. And so to our South Carolina friends, thank you for being on, and we'll be in touch with those who have been selected, and those who haven't been, you'll be notified as well, and we'll let you know when we hope to include you in our next cohort. So thank you, everybody. And if you have any questions, South Carolina, you know how to email me. You know how to find me. I'll be glad to help you. Thank you all.
Thanks, David. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.